Let me read to you a passage from the 14th chapter of St. Matthew's Gospel, verses 1 to 12. It's the Gospel for Saturday of the 17th week in Ordinary Time. St. Matthew writes, "At that time Herod the Tetrarch heard the reports about Jesus, and he said to his attendants, 'This is John the Baptist. He has risen from the dead. That is why miraculous powers are at work in him.' Now Herod had arrested John and bound him and put him in prison because of Herodias, his brother Philip's wife, for John had been saying to him, 'It is not lawful for you to have her.' Herod wanted to kill John, but he was afraid of the people, because they considered him a prophet. On Herod's birthday, the daughter of Herodias danced for them, and pleased Herod so much that he promised with an oath to give her whatever she asked. Prompted by her mother, she said, 'Give me here on a platter the head of John the Baptist.' The king was distressed, but because of his oaths and his dinner guests, he ordered that her request be granted, and had John beheaded in the prison. His head was brought in on a platter and given to the girl, who carried it to her mother. John's disciples came and took his body and buried it. Then they went and told Jesus." That's from Matthew chapter 14, verses 1 to 12. What does it suggest to us? Well, one of the principal founders of the modern socialist movement was Robert Owen. He lived from 1771 to 1858. And one of the intellectual pillars of his thought was his notion that no one is responsible for his own actions, because his whole character is formed independently of himself. People are products of their environment. Well, to a greater or lesser extent, many have this notion that, absolutely speaking, man is not truly free. Man is subject to his environment. And let us, for the purposes of this brief reflection now, take the term environment as including not only external circumstances, but also factors interior to himself. In this understanding, one's hereditary characteristics, one's inner impulses, one's family and social setting, all these interior and exterior elements will make up the environment which forms one's character, and therefore which shapes one's action. The result of this notion is the serious lessening of personal responsibility for one's actions. Now, there's no doubt that one's environment, comprehensively understood in this way, can indeed profoundly affect one's character and actions, especially if one freely allows one's environment to have this effect. For example, a person sees that he or she has an inner tendency to anger or theft, or perhaps to homosexual activity, and simply says, "Oh well, that's how I am," meaning that's how I'm made and built, and then makes little attempt to struggle against those tendencies. Responsibility is transferred to one's environment. Moreover, because of a meagre sense of personal responsibility for one's actions, a person can be careless of incitements to sin and wrongdoing coming from one's immediate environment, whether interior or exterior. What we might call the occasions of sin are not taken seriously because one's sense of personal responsibility for what one is then led to do is very weak. The occasions one finds oneself in can prompt a person to sin, and once in that occasion of sin, a person can, and culpably, lack all readiness to resist the temptation. For instance, friendships with immoral persons can constitute occasions of sin for which one will then be responsible. In our Gospel today that I read earlier, we have an instructive situation presented to us. John the Baptist has reproved Herod for taking Herodias to be his wife, when it was prohibited by Jewish law. Herodias was filled with hate for John, and Herod himself wished to do away with John, but his fame as a prophet deterred him. He feared the people. We learn from another gospel that Herod was also in superstitious awe at John and was drawn to listen to him. The result was that Herodias, who wished to kill John, was unable to effect her design. Now, what was it that brought John to his end? It was an occasion that suddenly arose and in which Herod suddenly found himself enmeshed. He did not find it in himself to resist the occasion of serious sin, and he fell. The result was a most heinous sin that brought to an end the prophetic mission of the greatest of the prophets prior to Christ. Herod threw a birthday party for himself and invited his leading guests. The daughter of Herodias danced, delighted them all, and prompted Herod, in a moment of boisterous and rash bravado, to promise anything she asked for. He was playing the big man. So out the girl skipped to her mother, and back she came with the request. Pertly she asked for the life of John the Baptist, his head. We read that, and I quote, "The king was distressed, but because of his oaths and his dinner guests, he ordered that her request be granted, and had John beheaded in the prison." So he was in a situation, an environment we might put it, that constituted an occasion of serious sin. The thought of his guests, or rather the thought of his appearing to be less of the big man than he had intended, was so powerful a thought that it could not be resisted. He allowed himself to be in a situation where he succumbed to his environment. He freely, though without much thought, placed himself in a situation to which, because of his moral weakness, he was unequal. He freely placed himself in an occasion of sin, and he fell grievously. Let us be very aware of our capacity to choose, and of our responsibility to choose at every point what is good. On this hinges the greatness or the ruin of man. Broadly speaking, we make ourselves. Broadly speaking, other things do not make us. The drama of life is the drama of the adherence of our will to what is morally good. We are called to make a great choice, to renew that choice daily, and to live consistently according to it. That choice is for God and His holy will, and we must resist everything that might deflect us from that path. In the use we make of our freedom, let us be like John the Baptist, and at every point be unlike, very unlike, the opposite of Herod.